Good morning, students. Today we continue our discussions on the history of print media in India. In the last class, we begin with the birth of newspaper. I mentioned this name, James Augustus Hickey, who is behind this paper named Bengal Gazette. So, basically, about Bengal Gazette, it is a newspaper which catered only for British residents in India, and it contained all those non-serious commercials, non-serious news, commercials, and gossips. So it is basically a newspaper which contained, as I said earlier, which was mostly devoted to gossip, rumor, and all those juicy and all those sob stories, all those sentimental stories about doings and misdoings of this East India Company staff, where this person, James Augustus Hickey, was working. And at some point, this exposure of this private lives of people, especially the lives of high officials like Governor General Warren Hastings, this led to his imprisonment and banning of his paper. So this was the first paper which produced anger uh, among the state officials, though it was not for noble reasons. And then we talked about the father of Indian journalism. It is James Silk Beckingham, who was the editor of this newspaper, Calcutta Journal. And what is the difference between the first one, Bengal Gazette, and this one? Here, the contents included political, commercial, literary, and the views of the editors. So it basically differed from what you saw in Bengal Gazette, which was mostly all those gossip stories. Here, he devoted these editorials discussing all those contemporary issues like the issue of sati and how the government failed to put an end to it. So, it was a direct attack on the government policies, and that is why he is considered to be a person who qualified to be called as a true journalist. And then comes the contributions of missionaries. We talked about how this first printing press was brought to the country in 1556, 1556 by all those Christian missionaries, and their main aim was to use this medium, use newspapers to spread their religion, to aid conversion to Christianity. And also another hidden agenda of these Christian missionaries was to support the views of these British administrators. So you must remember, the Christian missionaries were the ones who brought uh, printing press to India for the first time, and even the first book titled Doctrina Christa, it is Doctrine of Christ, which was also the first book in India. It was also a missionary publication in 1557, which happened in Goa. So most of the language newspapers, so that is the point, they introduced all those language newspapers. It was not basically in English. They introduced all those language newspapers because they understood that they had to study the languages of these natives to spread their religion. So they first learned the language, and then they created these types for the first time. And here we need to mention these missionaries in particular, especially these missionaries, Serampur missionaries. These are a group of Baptist missionaries, and they started this first vernacular newspaper, Digdarshan, which is a Bengali monthly. And later, the name of this Digdarshan was changed to Samachar Darpan, and it became bilingual. That is in English and Bengali. So, what is the difference between, what is the peculiarity of this newspaper? Here, it talked about their newspapers carried the news about India and Indians more than the British news, or rather than catering to the all those British residents, it addressed the news or the issues regarding the Indian population. So these are the first regional newspapers. In Kannada we have Kannada Samachar, Satyaduda in Telugu, Odia, as its first newspaper in 1849, and in Malayalam it is Rajya Samacharam by Herman Gundat. And then we talked about this contributions of Rajaram Mohan Roy, and he is known as the he's also known as the father of Indian journalism, along with James Silk Beckingham. So here he not only wrote for the newspapers, he ran a newspaper, he even sponsored many journals, edited them, and his basic need or basic aim was to fight for all those social reforms, and so at some point he even defended all those Indian philosophies, and some way he went against the newspapers of these Christian missionaries, where they were trying to spread a new religion, while Rajaram Mohan Roy was giving more emphasis to Indian culture and Indian ethos and Indian philosophy, and he actually urged these Indians to go back to their roots. So he has these different newspapers. One is Sambad Kaumudi, the other one is Miraut Akbar, and the other one is Brahmanical Magazine, in which he went against, he countered the missionaries' propaganda to spread religion. So these are the first Hindi language newspaper. It is Uddand Martand by Pandit Jugal Kishore Sukul. And please remember this newspaper named Bombay Samachar. It is the oldest newspaper in India, and it is still in existence. It was started in 1822, and it is still currently it is in existence. It was started by Fardavji Murzban. As the name indicates, he was a Parsi. And now we move to the next part, where we try to analyze the role of press in the freedom movement. So, the pioneering work of all those social reformers, like even Rajaram Mohan Roy, in the field of journalism in the early 19th century, led to a gradual development of newspapers, magazines, and other publications in India. All these activists were active in newspapers too. They were also journalists, so they used these medium to spread their ideas among these reading public. So this brutal suppression of the revolt of 1857, suppression of the Indian nationalist press, and founding of Indian National Congress, that was in 1885, and there are other citizen associations. They actually, all these were shaping Indian public opinion against the British. People started understanding, or people started realizing, the oppressive system promoted by British. So they found that newspaper is the right medium to gather a public opinion against British. And a resistant press in Bengal came. A resistant press, a press which is resistant to all those British policies. So we have this, the Hindi Patriot, which was established in 1853, which was which was by this author and playwright Girish Chandra Ghosh, and it became popular under the editorship of this Harish Chandra Mukherjee. And please remember this, in 1867, something important happened. This paper, the Hindi Patriot, published a play titled Neel Darpan. Neel Darpan was actually a play written by Deenabandhu Mitra. It was one of the popular plays during this time, Neel Darpan. And the background of this Neel Darpan, it is a play which which give, or which try to give out a perspective regarding this indigo revolt. If you know the modern history of India, you understand the significance of indigo revolt. Indigo revolt actually happened in 1859. It was actually a peasant revolt. The peasants who were forced to cultivate indigo. What is indigo crop? Indigo crop is something like a crop used to make dyes, make natural dyes which we use for clothes. Neil, it is indigo, it is actually blue color. So these British forced these peasants to grow this indigo crop, and these peasants started revolting because they found that these crops, indigo crops, it takes more water and it makes the soil infertile. So they wanted to, in place of indigo, they wanted to cultivate rice. So British planters forced these peasants to cultivate indigo crop. So play was this particular play titled Neel Darpan was a kind created a revolution, and this paper, this Hindi patriot, published this play and actually launched a movement against the British. And this publication, it resulted in the formation of Neil Commission or Indigo Commission. And later the paper was taken over by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. And that actually popularized this paper. Something like it created resistance, or people became more aware of this British oppressive policies of British. The paper strongly opposed all those government's excesses and demanded that Indians be appointed to top government post. And there is this another paper titled The Indian Mirror, which was the contemporary of this paper, which was also very popular among the reading public. And then came a series of nationalist newspapers. Series of nationalist newspapers from 1870 to 1918. They were all powerful newspapers, which was led by distinguished and fearless journalists. And then we have these emergence of these popular newspapers like Hindu and Swadeshamitra under the editorship of G. Subramanya Iyer. And then there is Kesari and Maharata by Balagangadhar Tilak, Bengali under Surendranath Banerjee, Amrita Basar Patrika under Shishir Kumar Ghosh and Motilal Ghosh, Indian Mirror, which was under N.N. Sen, and Voice of India under Dadabhai Nauroji. So these were all powerful newspapers by all those distinguished journalists and all those freedom fighters. And basically they were all Congress people. They were all part of this Indian National Congress. Even G. Subramania, he's Tamil and part of this Congress. Surendranath Banerjee, B.G. Balgangadhar Tilak, Dadabhai Nauroji. They were all part of Indian National Congress. So this press, Indian press, was the chief instrument for carrying out all those major political tasks. They aided this nationalist movement, all those freedom movement, political propaganda, education, and formation and propagation of nationalist ideology. To awake, to train, to mobilize, and even consolidate all those in nationalist public opinion. So this press was the chief instrument of to carry out all these political tasks, to educate, to form a kind of a nationalist ideology among the public. These were the chief. Uh, these were the chief uh, aim of this press, Indian press. Even the work of this National Congress was accomplished during this year through the press. And the resolutions it took and the proceedings of its meeting, the resolutions of this Indian National Congress, the proceedings of its meeting, they were all propagated through newspapers. Their major agenda, their major decisions were taken to the public through this Indian newspapers. Nearly all the major political controversies of the day were conducted through the press. And since the press was a powerful weapon in the development of Indian nationalism and nationalist movements, you, it was actually subjected to restrictions by the British government. They had to go through all those restrictions imposed by British government, who were reluctant to satisfy the aspirations and grant the demands of Indian nationalism. So press there acted as a powerful weapon which aided this Indian nationalism and all those nationalist or freedom movements. And the very fact that And the very fact that the British government had to enact a series of press acts, it proved a kind of a decisive role played by the press in the development of the nationalist movement. British had to impose many press acts to curb or to restrict the development or restrict the role of Indian press in aiding in helping this nationalist movement. And particularly you should remember this particular press act titled Vernacular Press Act, which came out in 1878, which is one of the milestones in the history of print media in India. And it is said that this act restricted the freedom of these vernacular press. Vernacular, it is actually all those regional press. So this is basically about Vernacular Press Act. Last time it came as a short answer question. So what is this Vernacular Press Act? Lord Lytton, he was criticized for his role in Second Anglo-Afghan War, which happened in 1878, which was basically between British Raj and Afghanistan, Emirates of Afghanistan. And Lord Lytton was criticized for what happened in that war. And he was criticized through these newspapers. So he did something that he completely prohibited, or he promulgated this act with an aim to prevent this vernacular press from expressing criticism of British policies under him. So he prevented this vernacular press, which expressed criticism against these British policies. So, what did he do in the Act? He made these publishers submit all the proof sheets of the contents of paper to police before publication. So, these publishers had to take all those proof sheets of all those contents to police before publishing it in newspaper. How strange it is. And it was the police who used to decide what the seditious news was and deleted them. They completely censored all those news which they considered to be seditious, which went against the state, and they deleted them. And those who published many of these newspapers, they were fined and the editors were jailed. And we had this uh, mm, newspaper, Amrita Basar Patrika, in Calcutta. They found a solution in a day's time. So this was a Vernacular Press Act which went against all those regional newspapers. And what did this particular paper do? Amrita Basar Patrika in Calcutta, they converted itself into an all English weekly within a week of this passing of this Vernacular Press Act. They completely changed the language into English. So this was particularly against regional languages. And so it became all English weekly within a week of this passing of this Vernacular Press Act. And papers in the north were wondering what the exact provisions of this act were even after 2 weeks of its existence. And at that time, Amrita Basar Patrika found a solution to come out of this come out of this problem. And the following years saw the appearances and disappearances of number of Bengali journals in quick succession due to this oppressive Vernacular Press Act. And then there is this successor, Lord Ripon, who reviewed these developments of this Vernacular Press Act, and finally he withdrew it. It was in 1881. However, the resentment against this Vernacular Press Act, it was something like a boon. Like it actually acted as a catalyst. It actually triggered what was there in the hearts of Indian people. They openly expressed their resentment with this Vernacular Press Act, and that actually fueled India's growing independence movement. The Indian Association, which is generally considered to be one of the precursors of the Indian National Congress, was one of the Act's biggest critics. And the crucial demand for a judicial trial in case of an accusation of sedition against an editor was never conceded by the government. So that was one of the demands of these people. They wanted judicial trial for all those editors who were acquitted of sedition, which were never granted by the government. But in October 1878, there was a minor modification of this act, like the submission of proof before publication was no longer insisted upon. They had to publish this copy to the police before publication. Now that was omitted, that was taken off, that they need not submit the proof before publication, but if there were any kind of seditious news in the newspaper, then they were jailed. Their bail bond always remained. So that was only the minor modifications which happened in 1878, and finally it was withdrawn in 1881. So these are the tallest leaders of the freedom movement, like Rusty Guftar by Dadabai Nauroji, please remember these names, and Kesari and Maharatha by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. So these are the powerful journalists of this period. And Punjabi, Bande Madaram and People by Lala Lajpat Rai, Hindustan Times and Hindustan by Madan Mohan Malaviya, Young India, Navjeevan and Harijan by Gandhiji. So we will deal with the role of Gandhiji in Indian press. So that is an important part. We will deal it in our next class. And Al Hilal by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, and National Herald by Jawaharlal Nehru, and Hindu in English in 1878, and Sodeshamitran in Tamil in 1881 by this G. Subramania Iyer, and it was mostly dedicated to nationalist cause in Madras Presidency. And we have our own newspaper, Madhrubhumi, which was conceived as a mouthpiece of Indian freedom movement. So you must understand Madhrubhumi was one of the newspapers which aided this freedom movement. While even then, this our newspaper, which is considered to be the most circulated one right now, Malayalam Manorama, is not in the scene. So Madhrubhumi was published in 18th March 1923, the day before the first anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's arrest for the first time by the British police. And Madhrubhumi was led by K.P. Keshav Menon, the prominent freedom fighter, and as editor, K.P. Keshav Menon was the editor, and K. Madhavan Nair as the MD. So Madhrubhumi was envisaged for spreading the message of this great national movement. And please see this newspaper. There is something wrong with this newspaper scan. It is Malayalam Manorama, and the date is 15th August 1947. So Malayalam Manorama actually recreated this, as you see in this film. One of this currently running, Drishyam. So actually, Malayalam Manorama was not was actually seized by Sir C.P. during that period, and they couldn't publish during 1947 at all. But they recreated this one. It is something which is recreated, which was not actually in print during that time. So that is wrong with this newspaper scan. It was not running during that time. So here ends our discussions on the second part of this history of print media. And I hope you will be coming to this next class, that will be offline class, listening to all these lectures. I will put a test where you need to write the whole history till here. So thank you girls. Have a nice day.